The wind was sharp that night in the wealthy district of Fairfield Heights. Most of the sprawling mansions glowed with warm, golden lights, laughter spilling from their walls. But at the far end of the lane, past the marble gates and manicured lawns, stood the largest of them all, the Harrington estate. Inside, the chandeliers sparkled like captured stars. But in the servants' quarters at the back, life was far from glamorous. Amara Ndlovu, a quiet, dark-skinned maid from Zimbabwe, moved swiftly through the dim corridor, a laundry basket balanced on her hip. She had been working here for 3 months, keeping her head down, never daring to step into the lavish parts of the house unless absolutely necessary. Her employer, Charles Harrington, was a name whispered with reverence in financial magazines and feared in boardrooms. Billionaire, investor, powerhouse. Yet in 3 months, Amara had never seen him in person. The man lived like a ghost, always behind locked office doors or away on business. She had only heard his voice once, through the walls. Deep, cold, calculated. It was just past midnight when Amara finished folding the last of the laundry. Most of the staff had gone home for the weekend. She was the only one on night duty, and she liked it that way. The silence gave her time to think about her daughter back in Harare, the reason she endured endless hours of scrubbing floors and polishing marble. But as she headed toward her tiny room, a strange sound stopped her in her tracks. It was faint at first, a muffled thump, like something heavy falling. Then came the choking gasps. Amara froze. The sound was coming from the East Wing, the private wing no staff were allowed to enter without permission. Her heart pounded. She knew the rules. Entering that side without authorization was grounds for immediate dismissal. But something deep inside urged her forward. She padded down the hall, her bare feet silent against the polished wood, until she reached the door to the study. It was ajar. She pushed it open. The sight made her drop the laundry basket. Charles Harrington, the man whose face she had only seen in Forbes, was sprawled on the floor, his skin pale, his lips blue. A half-empty bottle of heart medication lay nearby. "Sir, can you hear me?" she cried, rushing to his side. His eyes fluttered open for a second, unfocused, before rolling back. His breaths were shallow. Panic surged through her, but her hands moved on instinct. She had taken basic CPR training back home. Without thinking of the consequences, she tilted his head back and started chest compressions. "Come on, stay with me, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. Minutes felt like hours until finally his body jerked. A weak cough escaped his throat. Relief flooded her, and tears pricked her eyes. "You're going to be all right," she assured him, though she wasn't sure if he could even hear. She dialed emergency services, her hands trembling. When the paramedics arrived, they found Amara on the floor, cradling his head in her lap. She refused to move until they placed him on the stretcher. One of the paramedics, a tall man with sandy hair, glanced at her curiously. "Are you family?" She shook her head. "Just staff." But in the back of her mind, she knew something had changed. The next morning, the estate buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Staff whispered in corners, glancing at Amara as she passed. By midday, a stern-looking woman in a gray suit appeared at the servants' quarters. "Mr. Harrington wants to see you," she said curtly. Amara's pulse quickened. She followed the woman through the lavish hallways, her worn shoes almost silent against the plush Persian carpets. They stopped at a massive oak door. The woman knocked once, then pushed it open. Inside, Charles Harrington sat in a leather chair, dressed in a dark robe. His face was still pale, but his eyes, icy blue and piercing, were locked on her. "You saved my life last night," he said slowly, his voice deeper than she remembered. She nodded, unsure how to respond. "I don't like owing people," he continued. "So tell me, what do you want?" Amara blinked. "Sir, I don't. Don't lie to me," he cut in sharply. "Everyone wants something. Money, power, favors. Name it and it's yours." Her lips parted, but no words came. She hadn't done it for a reward. She just couldn't let someone die. Finally, she said, "I only want to keep my job." His eyes narrowed, as if studying her for cracks in her sincerity. "Very well," he said at last. "But understand this, Amara, I don't trust easily. And I don't believe in coincidences." She left the room shaken. That night, as she tried to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped into something far bigger than she could imagine. And she was right, because 3 days later, she found a sealed envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single piece of paper. In neat, bold handwriting, it read, "You're in danger. Get out of the Harrington estate before it's too late." Amara stared at the envelope in her trembling hands. The edges of the paper cut into her palm, but she barely noticed. Who could have sent it? The handwriting was unfamiliar, and there was no signature. The warning replayed in her mind like a broken record. "You're in danger. Get out of the Harrington estate before it's too late." She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, her thoughts a whirlpool. She had nowhere else to go. Her job here paid just enough to send money back home for her daughter's school fees. Leaving now would mean starting from scratch, something she couldn't afford. But there was something else. Something in Charles Harrington's eyes when he had said, "I don't believe in coincidences." The following morning, the estate was strangely quiet. The usual hum of gardeners trimming the hedges and cleaners polishing the endless glass panes was gone. When Amara entered the kitchen, she found Maria, the head cook, frowning as she kneaded dough. "You heard?" Maria asked in a low voice. "Heard what?" Amara replied cautiously. "Mr. Harrington's brother, Edward, is back. Flown in from Geneva. The staff says trouble follows him like a shadow." Trouble. The word sent a chill down Amara's spine. Later that day, while polishing the marble floor near the main staircase, Amara heard heavy footsteps. She looked up and saw him, Edward Harrington. He was taller than Charles, with a sharp jawline, slicked back blonde hair, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He stopped in front of her, his gaze sweeping over her like he was sizing her up. "So you're the hero maid," he said, his British accent dripping with something she couldn't quite place. She straightened. "I just did what anyone would do." "Not anyone, darling. And certainly not in this house." His smile widened, but it wasn't friendly. "Be careful. People who stand too close to my brother tend to disappear." Before she could respond, he walked off, whistling a haunting little tune. That night, sleep refused to come. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. At one point, she thought she heard voices outside her door. When she opened it, the hallway was empty, except for a faint scent of expensive cologne. The next morning, Charles summoned her again. This time, his expression was darker. "Amara," he said, "I had my men check into you." Her breath caught. "You have no debts, no criminal record, no hidden agenda. At least, nothing you've told me about," he continued, his eyes boring into hers. "I've told you the truth, sir," she said, steadying her voice. "Good, because there are people in this house who would use you to get to me." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Stay away from Edward. And if anyone gives you a message, any message, tell me immediately." Her heartbeat thundered. Someone had given her a message, but instinct told her not to mention it. Not yet. 2 days later, the first real twist hit. While dusting the library, a grand room lined floor to ceiling with books, Amara noticed a shelf slightly ajar. When she pushed it, it swung open like a door, revealing a narrow passageway. Against every ounce of logic, she stepped inside. The air was cold and smelled faintly of damp stone. She followed the passage until it ended at a small hidden study, lit only by a single lamp. On the desk were stacks of photographs, some of Charles, some of Edward, and her. Recent ones. Photos of her doing laundry, walking in the garden, sleeping in her tiny room. Her hands shook as she picked one up. Written on the back in that same bold handwriting from the envelope were the words, "They killed her. Don't let them kill you too." Before she could process the meaning, footsteps echoed in the passage. She panicked, shoving the photo back and slipping out of the hidden room just in time to close the shelf behind her. She was still catching her breath when Edward appeared at the library door. "You lost, sweetheart?" he asked with a slow smirk. She forced a smile. "Just cleaning." His gaze lingered on her far too long. "Good. Keep your hands where they belong." That night, Amara couldn't eat. Her mind kept circling back to the note. They killed her. Who was her? And why was she being watched? Her questions found a partial answer the next morning. Maria, the cook, pulled her aside in the pantry. "Be careful with the Harrington brothers," Maria whispered. "You know there used to be another maid here, yes? Her name was Elise. Sweet girl about your age. She vanished." "Vanished," Amara repeated. Maria nodded gravely. "One day she was here, the next, her things were gone. Police came, but nothing stuck. Rumor is, she saw something she shouldn't have." That evening, Charles called Amara to his study again. But this time, when she arrived, he wasn't alone. Edward was leaning casually against the desk, swirling a glass of brandy. "We were just talking about you," Edward said, his grin shark-like. Charles's jaw tightened. "I told you to stay away from her." Edward chuckled. "Relax, brother. I just find it fascinating that she happened to be in the right place at the right time to save your life. Almost convenient." Amara's pulse raced. "Leave," Charles ordered his brother. But Edward's eyes locked on hers as he walked past, and he mouthed something she couldn't forget. "You're next." That night, someone tried to break into her room. The door rattled violently, and when she shouted, the footsteps retreated into the dark. By morning, she knew she had two choices: leave the estate and lose her only income, or stay and uncover the truth about what was really happening inside the Harrington mansion. She chose to stay, and that's when she made the most dangerous decision of her life: to spy on her billionaire boss. For the next 2 nights, Amara barely slept. She kept the lights on, one ear tuned to the slightest noise outside her door. Whoever had tried to break in might try again. But she wasn't just waiting. She started memorizing the patterns of the household. When Charles left his study, when Edward disappeared for hours, which rooms the other staff avoided. Every day she pretended to work, but her real goal was to find more of those hidden spaces in the mansion. It was on the 3rd evening that she discovered the second secret room. In the report, 1 week before Amara started working at the estate. Her mind raced. The bottle of heart medication she'd seen that night. The accident that left him gasping for air. It was too convenient. She was still piecing it together when the sound of footsteps echoed above. She quickly shoved the files back into the box and slipped behind a pillar in the corner. The panel in the wall creaked open, and Edward stepped inside, humming the same haunting tune she'd heard days ago. He went straight to a different shelf, pulled out a black folder, and flipped it open. That's when Amara saw it. Inside the folder was a photo of her. A recent one, taken from an upstairs window while she was hanging laundry. Edward chuckled under his breath, then muttered, "Soon." She didn't dare breathe until he left. That night, she went to Charles. She told him about the staircase, the files, and Edward. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, without looking at her, he said, "Elise wasn't just a maid. She was my informant. She was helping me gather proof against Edward. My brother is laundering money through this estate, using shell companies, and he doesn't care who he has to silence to keep it hidden." Amara's stomach churned. "And you think I'm next?" Charles's gaze met hers, and for the first time, she saw something vulnerable in his eyes. "Edward knew I was on to him. The night you found me, I didn't forget my medication. Someone switched it. Someone wanted me dead." The realization hit her like ice water. She hadn't stumbled into saving Charles's life by chance. She had walked into the middle of a war between brothers. But the final twist came the next day. A manila envelope arrived at the estate, addressed to Charles. Inside were bank statements, flight records, and, to Amara's shock, a copy of her employment contract. It had been signed not by Charles, but by Edward. "He hired you," Charles said grimly. "He brought you here." Her mind spun. "But why?" Charles leaned forward. "Because he thought you'd be easy to manipulate, or easy to frame." That night, everything came to a head. Amara woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright to find her room filling with haze. The hallway outside was glowing orange, fire. She stumbled into the corridor, coughing, and saw Edward at the far end, smiling in the flickering light. "Accidents happen, sweetheart," he called over the roar of the flames. Before she could respond, Charles appeared from a side door, pulling her toward the servants' exit. They barely made it outside before the east wing erupted in an explosion of glass and fire. Sirens wailed in the distance. In the aftermath, the police swarmed the estate. Edward was gone, vanished without a trace. Charles stood beside Amara, his robe singed, his face pale. "You saved my life twice now," he said quietly. "But you've lost your safety because of it." She looked at him, her voice trembling. "What happens now?" His gaze hardened. "Now we hunt him. And that's where the story ends for now. With a billionaire and a maid, bound by survival, stepping into a dangerous alliance neither of them asked for. If you were in Amara's place, a poor maid suddenly caught in the deadly feud of billionaires, would you risk everything to fight? Or walk away and protect yourself? Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the continuation of this story. You have no idea what's coming next.